So today we're talking about a fancy subject, so I thought I would wear a fancy outfit since I haven't worn Lolita fashion in a while, so we're dressed cute today. Hey guys, I'm Angie Designs and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I haven't done a discussion on costuming for a while, so I want to talk about something within the realm of costume design. So I have an opinion on costume design that might be a little controversial, and that is that some period dramas with historically inaccurate costuming is totally valid and sometimes even good. I'm also gonna leave a disclaimer right here in my little intro that I actually work in costuming. I actually studied in the field as well. I took a year of costume production after fashion design. I have taken classes and courses on both costume design and on historical fashion, and I work at a site that is in the 1860s. Like, I work in historical fashion, so I'm not just pulling stuff out of thin air. I'm talking about things based on my thoughts and opinions based on some of these experiences. It is also a major special interest to me, hence why I have studied it and work in it. So to talk about the subject on how sometimes historically inaccurate period drama costumes are actually good, we actually have to discuss a little bit about how costume design works. And this can be a whole complicated thing because, of course, again, we take full courses on this. Like, it takes multiple weeks to learn these things. To really sum it up, there's a lot of research and then there's the vision for the final product that kind of go into what impacts the final costumes you see on screen. The costume designers are either experts on a time period, the time period of the piece of media they're making, or they will do hours and hours of research into it to make sure they are doing things properly. They will look at extant garments, they will look at patterns that survive from the era, they will look at all sorts of different sources to fully understand the era that they're working within. This research will impact the fabrics, the silhouette of the garments, the undergarments worn, kind of a little bit of everything in the costumes. And again, some shows, some TV shows, some movies will actually bring in an expert on that era. For example, I am technically an expert in training, I like to call myself, on the 1860s because of where I work. I say in training because technically I am deemed an expert due to my job title, but I obviously do not know as much as my coworkers who have been there a lot longer than I have. That is basically our job, is to be experts on that era. Now, the other aspect of costume design that impacts things is the overall vision of the finished project. The aesthetic choices, the things that you work with the set designer, the director, the overall impression the piece makes. Of course, this can influence the costumes because the costumes are a major part of a period drama to make you feel like you're in that era or whatever aesthetic they're working within. So depending on the mood and the whole feeling of the piece, that can influence a lot in costume design. Certain characters will also influence certain choices. Like, maybe bright reds like that didn't exist in that time period, but you might put a character in slightly brighter red to tell you something about that character. Some characters who are very serious will have silhouettes that kind of show that they're more serious. Costumes are an element of storytelling within the world without necessarily directly saying things. So the vision that goes into it is what impacts that. Some of you might be familiar with Bernadette Banner's really great videos where she ranks period dramas, and sometimes she just has to put things in, it was a design choice, and the vision, the overall vision of a piece is kind of what puts that. It's the design choices that sway the historical inaccuracies. So now let's talk about Bridgerton, because this is actually the series that kind of influenced my idea to even make this video. And I'll be talking about Bridgerton and the Queen Charlotte series kind of in tandem because, of course, they are a related series. They're telling kind of the same story. And surprise, surprise, these series are not historically accurate period dramas, which is why I'm talking about them. But you can see that the costume designers still did their research, and some of the elements definitely are there. Most of the silhouettes of most of the dresses on most of the women, and a lot of the jackets, the shirts, the long collars on the men's shirts, those types of things are all definitely from that era. Other things are definitely missing. Like, this era really liked a big extravagant bonnet-like hat and ringlet curls right next to the face, things that we might find very weird. So the hairstyles are pretty off for most of the characters, and lack of hats, and the fabric choices. Most of those are extremely modern fabrics on very historical silhouettes. Very fantasy-esque looks with like fancy rhinestone details that might not have necessarily existed back then. I believe the first season of Bridgerton takes place in 1813, and yeah, the hairstyles were very curly. They were starting to go up and look, to a modern audience, pretty strange. Modern audiences would likely interpret these stranger hairstyles as well, strange. And therefore they didn't want to put their beautiful main ladies in these strange hairstyles because they want to tell the audience that this person is meant to be beautiful. So they put them in hairstyles that are a little bit more contemporary and modern for our viewing. Like when you see in historical dramas the half up hairstyle, the little half pony, that's not a thing. Period dramas make you think they are. No, they're not. The things that are off are all to cater to a modern audience's perspective and current views and likes. There's a certain aesthetic to the Bridgerton and Queen Charlotte series, very romanticized, lots of beautiful colors, lots of florals everywhere. There's a very specific Bridgerton aesthetic. You can see it in the set design, you can see it in the graphic design, you can see it in all of these different elements, even the music choices, using classical sounding music with modern songs. It all ties together. Everything is kind of historically inspired, and then you throw some modernism into it because of the modern audience viewing it. Bridgerton is a historical fantasy, a historical fiction. Even at the beginning of the Queen Charlotte series, because Queen Charlotte was a real person, Bridgerton family, for example, were not, as far as I know. It's not based on real people. Yes, there are people with the name Bridgerton, but these particular characters are not real people, yet they're interacting with the real person that is Queen Charlotte. So even the series begins with saying, based loosely on a true story. I can't remember the exact wording, but it actually does say that Queen Charlotte is based loosely on the story of Queen Charlotte and King George. But it's not a true story. It's a romanticization of it. Now, there are some choices I disagree with, like, please, why in the wedding scene in Queen Charlotte was George not wearing a wig, or at least with long hair or something? I know that the modern audiences don't like the little drill curl things right next to the head, but it just made everything look very off and informal, which his wedding, he's king, so it felt really weird. But most of the choices I understand from the perspective of what they were aiming to do. The historical influences are there in most of the costumes, but they're just bent a little bit to fit this aesthetic they're going for. A very contemporary, romanticized aesthetic. Good design involves knowing what the rules are and how to bend them in a way that fits the narrative or the visual story you're trying to tell. And that is exactly what they did in Bridgerton, in my personal opinion. Their aim, they reached exactly what they were aiming to make very effectively. Bad design is dismissing the era completely and just guessing and doing what you want, not knowing what the rules already were, because you need to know what the rules of the era were or how that era's fashion worked before you can bend it and alter it. You need to know the base you're working off of. So when I see people saying that the Bridgerton costumes are bad, they're judging them from a historically accurate perspective. And if you judge it from that perspective, yeah, they're not historically accurate. If you were rating them on how historically accurate they were, they're bad. But that is not what these creators, these designers, the director were aiming to make. They were not aiming for historically accurate pieces. What they were aiming to make was a period drama with fictional elements and romantic aesthetics that appeal to a contemporary modern audience. And from that perspective, their costuming is extremely successful. They did what they were aiming to do. So in conclusion, what can we learn from this? Well, first of all, we can learn to kind of take in our media based on what the creator was trying to tell us. Bridgerton is not trying to tell us this was a real story. This is historical fiction, historical fantasy, historical romance. And I do think it's a shame sometimes when we see these pieces not following the historical elements, like the hairstyles, because a modern audience might find it weird. I think it's a shame that that happens because, of course, back then those elements were pretty, and those who appreciate historical fashion would really appreciate that because they find it beautiful. So it is a shame that there isn't more historical accuracy in these pieces because of that, but I also understand why. But there is a major silver lining from the success of Bridgerton and Queen Charlotte. These series and their success has led to a major interest in the time periods present in these shows. I've seen all sorts of people from different backgrounds, different ages, having a sudden interest in these eras because they wanted to learn more about them. And then they're learning about the historical inaccuracies in these shows, and they're learning more about them. And if a series with romanticized, fantastical, modern elements has led to people learning more about the actual time period, I think that's a good thing. Something like this, viewers having more interest in historical pieces and historical garments and all of this might actually in the end lead to more films being produced with more historical accuracies in them. So I personally think Bridgerton did nothing wrong. I know it's a hot take. I like the costumes because you know what? They're not historically accurate, but they're pretty. They're pretty. I understand what they're aiming to do, which makes me appreciate that they are just pretty garments that tell a story, and they do so quite effectively. Yes, it can kind of hurt your soul a little bit when you do love historical fashion and historical accuracies to be like, oh, imagine what this could have been, but it's not trying to be that, unfortunately. So enjoy the series for what it is, and remember not to judge pieces solely on historical accuracy, because even though that can be very fun to kind of nitpick sometimes, try to think of what the creators are trying to tell you with the costumes. So this has been a little in defense of Bridgerton, because yes, I actually like the costumes, and I think we need to judge them based on what they're trying to be and not on what we want them to be. And thank you guys for coming along on this little costume rant, a little costume explanation, little observation and defense of historically inaccurate period dramas. I love doing this kind of stuff. I had so much fun writing this particular script and talking about this. I had a reason to dress up. You know, today's a great day. Let me know if you'd like to see more things like this. I do want to talk a little bit more about historical fashion on my channel, because of course that is a major interest of mine. I know that I've kind of introduced a bit more of that with my recent videos on my Sakizo project. Be sure to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. See you guys later.